I was 27 years old when the floor dropped out from under me. Now, at 63, with silver in my hair and a steadier heart than I ever thought possible, I can still recall every detail of that day, the one where my loyalty was tested, my silence sharpened, and my fate twisted into something no one could have predicted. I'd spent nearly a decade at Everstead Systems, a company I helped grow from 2 cramped offices in a brick building downtown to a 12-story fortress that dominated the skyline. I had trained every new hire, recovered every lost file, worked through weekends and holidays without ever asking for a raise or even a thank you. My devotion was a quiet kind, the kind no one applauded but everyone relied on. So when Martin Cole, the department head, called me into his office with Karen from HR already seated, I didn't need words to know what was coming. The air had shifted weeks earlier, the kind of change you can sense before anyone admits it. I sat down, folded my hands, and listened. "We've made some restructuring decisions," Martin said, his eyes darting toward the papers in front of him. "We'll have to let you go." I nodded once. "I understand completely." I stood and walked out without pleading or anger. No tears, just quiet acknowledgement. Back at my desk I began to pack. A family photograph of my daughter Sophie, smiling with 2 missing teeth. A ceramic mug she painted in elementary school. A cactus plant that had survived, like me, nearly a decade under fluorescent lights. Around me, younger employees stole glances and then quickly bent their heads back to their screens. Most of them had been trained by me. They were bright kids, but they had no idea how much of the company's foundation had been built with my hands. They didn't know the old architecture, the buried access codes, the back doors in the systems that I alone understood. Had ignorance was about to become their greatest liability. When people think they've discarded you, they rarely realize what they've actually lost. For Everstead, losing me wasn't just losing an employee. It was like tearing out the spine of a book and expecting the story to still make sense. But what happens when the discarded one holds secrets too dangerous to ignore? What happens when silence itself becomes a weapon sharper than words? As I boxed up the remnants of my career, Clara from marketing stopped by. Her face was tight with concern. "Marilyn, I just heard. This is absurd. You practically built this place." I shrugged. "Companies change direction." "Not like this," she snapped. "Not after everything you've done." Her voice rose, drawing attention. I touched her arm and whispered, "It's fine." But it wasn't fine, and deep inside I knew that the people who thought they had erased me were about to realize I was the one person they should never have underestimated. Walking out of Everstead's glass doors that afternoon, I didn't feel anger, I felt calculation. For 10 years I had been their fixer, the woman who held systems together when they crumbled, the one who caught mistakes before they became scandals. And in that role I had seen more than anyone realized. While Martin and his polished consultant, Ethan Price, whispered behind boardroom doors, I had quietly documented everything. Years earlier, when Everstead was recovering from a compliance scandal, I had been tasked with creating an internal audit system that tracked unauthorized access. They thought of it as busy work, I thought of it as insurance, and now that insurance was mine, I drove home with my cardboard box in the passenger seat. The 12-story tower of Everstead shrank in my rearview mirror, but the evidence I carried in encrypted flash drives, oh, that was very much alive. That night I sat at my kitchen table, the house silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. My husband, David, was reading the newspaper across from me, unaware that his wife had just lost her job. I hadn't told him yet. "Everything okay at work?" he asked casually, not looking up. I smiled faintly. "Just changes, nothing I haven't seen before." But inside I was buzzing. For months I'd noticed unusual shifts, emails I was excluded from, projects quietly reassigned, permissions to systems subtly revoked. I had kept quiet, watching, cataloguing. And then, while running one of my routine security scans, I'd spotted something that didn't belong, regular financial transfers to a shell vendor, Summit Solutions, LLC. At first the payments were small, but they grew, $10,000, then $25,000, then $60,000. A quick search revealed Summit Solutions was registered at a P.O. box and had no real employees, but the approval chain was signed by none other than our CFO, Alan Pierce. Alan's brother-in-law, as it turned out, was listed as Summit's owner. They weren't just cutting me out, they were laundering money right under everyone's noses. I leaned back in my chair that night, my fingers resting on the flash drive. For 10 years I had given Everstead everything, my time, my loyalty, my knowledge, and Tim Hay had thrown me out like outdated software. But what they didn't know was that their betrayal had already unlocked something inside me, a part of myself I never thought I'd use. The next morning I woke up with no alarm clock, no commute, no meetings, just silence. David had already left for work. I made myself coffee and sat down at my desk, staring at my personal laptop. This wasn't the end of my story, it was the beginning of theirs. At exactly 9:15 a.m. I sent my first email. It was short, anonymous, precise, sent directly to Martin Cole. Financial irregularities, immediate review needed. Inside I detailed just enough of the Summit Solutions payments to make him sweat. I left out the family connection. I wanted to see how he would react. By 9:45 my phone buzzed with his number. I didn't answer. His voicemail was shaky, urgent. "Marilyn, we need to discuss your email immediately. Call me back." I smiled. For the first time in weeks, I was in control. They thought they had erased me, but I was still here, watching, recording, waiting. And I wasn't just planning to reveal their scheme. I was planning to dismantle the very foundation they stood on. By noon, I received another email, this time from HR. Karen's words were sharp and sterile. "Ms. Rivers, cease all communications with Everstead employees. Any further contact may result in legal action." But here's the thing. They were bluffing. I hadn't signed any separation agreement. They wanted me quiet because I knew too much. That night, I opened another flash drive, the one with my deepest records. Inside were years of logs, approvals, access trails, and notes that connected the dots no one else had seen. Alan Pierce, the CFO, had personally expanded his financial access 18 months ago, the same time Summit Solutions began receiving inflated payments. And Martin? He wasn't ignorant. He was helping cover it up. Hay thought I was just an aging systems woman, easy to discard. But I had become the one thing they feared most, the person who saw everything. The morning after my anonymous email, I woke with a strange calmness. At 63, looking back, I realized now that this was the first time I truly understood what it felt like to hold the power others feared. At 27, I had been underestimated, dismissed as a quiet worker, someone who blended into the background. But the truth was, blending in had given me the perfect cover to notice everything. I didn't check my phone immediately that day. I let the minutes tick by, sipping my coffee, watching sunlight stretch across the kitchen table. I wanted Martin and Alan to stew in their panic. Desperation reveals weakness, and I needed to see exactly how weak they were. The ones who plot in shadows always fear the light, and I had just cracked their blinds open. Would they try to silence me, or would they try to buy me back into their silence? By late morning, I had my answer. A knock sounded at my front door, not a light tap, not a neighbour's polite hello. This was firm, deliberate. I opened it to see Ethan Price, the slick consultant who had been circling the executive team for months. He wore his tailored suit like armour, his smile as false as the company's promises. "Marilyn," he said smoothly, "may I come in?" I hesitated. Ethan was young, early 30s at most, but he carried himself as though he owned every room he entered. I let him step inside, though every nerve in me screamed caution. He didn't waste time. "We understand you've been unsettled about recent transitions. Martin asked me to reach out, make sure you're doing all right." I raised an eyebrow. "Unsettled?" "Yes," he said, smoothing his tie. Change can be difficult, especially for long-term employees, but the company appreciates your years of service. That word, appreciates, landed in my stomach like a stone. Appreciation had been their favorite mask for exploitation. I leaned back against the counter. And? He cleared his throat, lowering his voice. Let's not complicate matters. If you're in possession of any internal files, I'd advise deleting them immediately. In return, Everstead is prepared to offer you a generous severance, more than what's standard, a recognition of your loyalty. The audacity almost made me laugh. They thought I'd trade silence for scraps. I tilted my head, studying him. You're assuming I have files? A flicker crossed his face, too quick for most to notice, but I caught it. Fear. He knew I had them. I'm assuming, he said carefully, that you're too smart to get yourself into trouble. That's when I decided to play the card I'd been holding. I walked over to my desk, pulled open a drawer, and set a flash drive on the table between us. His eyes locked on it immediately, his breath quickening. This, I said lightly, this is nothing, just backups of old projects, but imagine what I could have if I wanted. Ethan didn't even touch the drive. His hands stayed folded, too controlled. Marilyn, we both know you're not interested in drama. Let me handle this. Take the package we're offering. It'll be easier for everyone. I smiled thinly. Tell Martin I don't do easy. He stood, smoothing his jacket again, but his polished composure had cracked. Then I'll tell him to prepare for difficult. When the door shut behind him, my kitchen felt colder. For the first time, I allowed a tremor of fear to slip through me. If they were sending Ethan to my doorstep, it meant they weren't just worried, they were desperate, and desperation, I knew, was dangerous. That night, I sat in bed with my laptop open, scrolling through the Summit Solutions transfers. I zoomed out, looking not just at the money, but at the timing. Payments coincided with contract bids, city permits, even political donations. This wasn't just corporate greed, it was a full-scale laundering pipeline. The next morning, I drove to a small diner on the edge of town. There I met Detective Carla Jennings, an old friend from high school who had worked her way up through the city's white-collar crime unit. I hadn't seen her in years, but I knew she was the one person I could trust with the truth. I slid into the booth, setting my coffee cup between us. Carla, I need to show you something. Her brow furrowed as I passed her a flash drive. This isn't exactly the way I imagined our reunion. You'll understand, I said. Everstead's been laundering money, millions, and I have the proof. She studied me, measuring whether I was serious. Then she pocketed the drive without another word. Sometimes survival isn't about fighting alone, it's about knowing who to trust when the walls start closing in. That afternoon, my phone rang again. Martin's voice, low and strained, filled my voicemail. Marilyn, we know you've been talking to people. This can end badly for everyone. Call me back. But I didn't. Instead, I prepared. I began setting traps inside the files, encrypted trails that only I knew how to unlock. If anyone tried to delete evidence, the system would trigger automatic backups to off-site servers. They couldn't silence me without burying themselves. Days passed and the pressure grew. Anonymous envelopes appeared in my mailbox with no return address, blank paper inside. My tires were slashed one morning outside the grocery store. Once I caught a shadow moving past my window at night, but when I looked again, the street was empty. They were trying to scare me into silence, but fear had long since burned out of me. I wasn't the one who should be afraid anymore. They were, because I wasn't just holding evidence, I was holding a story that could unravel everything they had built. A week later, Carla called. Her voice was sharp, urgent. Marilyn, we've confirmed it. The company's funneling money through dummy vendors tied to political campaigns. But here's the thing, they've got protection, higher up than I expected. If we move too quickly, they'll bury the case before it sees daylight. My stomach twisted. So what now? We need leverage, public leverage, something they can't erase quietly. That's when I knew my role wasn't finished. My silence had been my shield, but now my voice would have to be my sword. Everstead thought firing me would erase me. Instead, it gave me the freedom to expose them, and I wasn't about to stop until every secret they tried to hide was dragged into the light. Because sometimes revenge isn't about destroying someone in the shadows, it's about forcing them to face the truth in front of the world. I didn't sleep the night Carla called. Her warning kept circling in my mind. This wasn't just about Martin or Alan. The rot ran deeper, reaching into places I hadn't imagined. At 27, I had believed corruption had limits, boundaries that law or morality would eventually enforce. But now, looking back from 63, I understand how naive that was. Corruption never stands alone. It grows in silence, feeding on power, spreading until it wraps around institutions meant to protect us. And yet, knowing all that, I couldn't back down. They thought firing me erased me, but all it did was set me free. 3 days later, I carried a manila envelope through the downtown streets, my heart beating hard against my ribs. Inside was my most carefully arranged file, stripped of jargon, polished so anyone could follow it. A trail of fake vendor payments that led straight into political donations. My steps carried me past the city courthouse, past the banks that once funded Everstead, and finally into the offices of the Ledger. I asked to see Sarah Monroe, the journalist whose investigations had toppled men who thought they were untouchable. When she looked at me across her cluttered desk, her eyes sharp with suspicion, I told her the truth. The system won't protect me, but maybe the truth will. She held my gaze for a long moment before she reached for the envelope. That night, I unplugged my phone. The calls wouldn't stop. Unknown numbers, heavy voicemails that I refused to play. At 2 a.m, I heard footsteps on my porch and the slam of a car door outside. They wanted me to know they were watching, and for a moment I sat frozen, my body humming with fear. But I didn't move. Whoever they weren't wrong. I was being watched, but so were they. 2 days later, the Ledger broke the story. The headline was bold, impossible to ignore. Everstead systems under fire. Millions laundered through dummy vendors. My hands trembled as I read, but not from fear, from relief. Finally, the world could see what they had done. The article named Alan Pierce laid out Summit Solutions' fake transactions and hinted at ties to local politicians. Even with only the confirmed pieces, it was enough to ignite a firestorm. Reporters crowded outside Everstead's tower, shareholders panicked, and inside those glass walls, whispers turned into shouts. And then Martin called me himself. His voice, once so polished, was ragged with panic. "Marilyn, what have you done? Do you understand the magnitude of this? You're destroying people's lives." His desperation almost made me laugh. "You destroyed mine first," I told him. He tried again, his tone dropping to a threat. "You think you're safe? You're not. These people won't stop until you're ruined." But I had already survived their attempts to erase me. "Then let them try," I said, and hung up. In that moment, I realized what I had really taken back. Revenge wasn't just about evening the score. It was about reclaiming the voice they tried to silence, and I wasn't whispering anymore. But the storm was only growing. Within a week, Alan resigned under the excuse of health issues. Martin vanished from public view. Ethan slipped away, only to resurface quietly under another name. And yet the scandal widened. Carla was right. Higher names were involved, state officials who had shielded Everstead for years. The story spread until it touched politics itself. Carla called again, her voice clipped and urgent. "You lit the match, Marilyn, but this fire is spreading farther than we can control." I exhaled into the phone. I didn't start it, I just refused to cover it up. But even as I said it, the threats came closer. Anonymous letters in my mailbox, this time not blank but filled with jagged words in ink. My tires slashed again. And one night, as I walked to my car, a man stepped from the shadows, broad-shouldered, his voice low and threatening. "You should have kept quiet." For a heartbeat, fear clamped down on me. But then headlights swung across the lot as another car pulled in. The man cursed and disappeared back into the darkness. I stood frozen, heart racing, but more certain than ever. If they were resorting to fear, it meant they were losing. The second article from the Ledger hit harder than the first. It named Martin outright, exposed the campaign donations, and hinted at a governor's race tied to Everstead's dirty money. And then I saw the line that made me still. Former employee and systems analyst Marilyn Rivers provided key evidence. My anonymity was gone. My name was public, my face open to judgment. Reporters crowded my lawn, neighbors whispered, some calling me brave, others warning that I'd painted a target on myself. My husband urged me to stop, but when I looked at Sophie, only 12 then, I knew why I couldn't. She was the reason I had to keep going, not for revenge alone, but so she could grow into a world where truth might still have a chance. In the months that followed, the fallout consumed them. Alan was indicted. Martin slipped out of public life, his career in ruins. Ethan tried to rebuild under a new company, but his reputation was scorched, and the senator tied to Summit Solutions lost re-election in disgrace. Their empire collapsed, not because I screamed, but because I refused to be silent. As for me, I rebuilt in a different way, not in boardrooms, but in classrooms, teaching young women about systems, about security, and about the danger of underestimating themselves. And sometimes, when I pass Everstead, it is Glass Tower, I pause and smile. They thought they had erased me, but I became the pen that rewrote their story. Revenge, I learned, doesn't always come in fire and fury. Sometimes it comes in patience, in silence that waits, in truth revealed at just the right time. They tried to take everything from me, but I am still here, 63 years old, unbroken, while their empire lies in ashes of their own making.